They abandoned the fat girl at auction with no clothes, then the mountain man did the unthinkable. In a dusty frontier town, the crowd jeered as a trembling girl was stripped of all dignity and sold like cattle. But just when all hope was lost, a scarred mountain man stepped forward. He didn't bid. He covered her shame and carried her away. The crowd gasped. But this was only the beginning. Because hidden in the girl's past is a secret the town, her kin, and even the railroad will fight to claim. Land with water more valuable than gold. Soon, fires will burn, guns will rise, and the mountain man must choose vengeance or faith. Will mercy be enough to protect the girl no one wanted? Or will the greed of men tear them apart before she ever finds a home? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Pine Bluff's dusty main street as the crowd pressed closer to the auction platform. The wooden planks, usually stained with livestock drool and mud, now bore the trembling bare feet of 15-year-old Sarah Mae Harper. Her shoulders hunched forward as she tried to make herself smaller, arms crossed tight against her chest. Tears streaked down her round cheeks, but her quiet sobs were nearly lost in the growing noise of the crowd. Ezekiel Harper, her uncle, swayed slightly as he gripped a half-empty whiskey bottle. His bloodshot eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction as he watched his niece suffer. "Ain't worth the food she eats," he called out, earning scattered laughter from the onlookers. "Time somebody got some use out of her." The auctioneer, Tom Wilson, adjusted his vest and cleared his throat. Though he'd sold countless cattle and horses from this very spot, something in his expression showed his discomfort. Still, the promise of a cut of the profits loosened his tongue. "What do we have here, folks? A fine. Well, a generous portion of young woman." More laughter rippled through the crowd. "Might need 2 horses to carry this one home." Sarah Mae's shoulders shook harder. She kept her eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden platform, refusing to look at the faces below. The wind kicked up dust devils that swirled around the platform, and gooseflesh pebbled her exposed skin. Near the back of the gathering, Silas Boone stood as still as a pine tree. His weathered face gave away nothing, but his calloused fingers wrapped tighter around his pack strap until the leather creaked. He'd come to town only to trade furs and restock supplies, not expecting to witness such cruelty. The familiar urge to retreat to his mountain solitude pulled at him, but something kept his boots rooted to the spot. "Reverend, you can't allow this." Mrs. Peterson, the seamstress, tugged at Reverend Walsh's sleeve. "She's just a child." The Reverend, a thin man with silver hair, stepped forward. "Brothers and sisters, this is not God's way. This girl needs protection, not—" "Shut your trap, preacher." Ezekiel stumbled forward, shoving the older man roughly aside. "She's Harper blood, and we'll do with her what we please." He took another swig from his bottle, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Besides, ain't like she's good for anything else. Way she eats us out of house and home." Sarah Mae flinched at her uncle's words, trying to curl further into herself. A fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks as scattered cruel laughter rose from the crowd. The sound seemed to please Ezekiel, who grinned and raised his bottle in a mock toast. "Let's start the bidding at $5. The auctioneer's voice carried across the street. Surely someone needs a fresh young hand for cooking and cleaning. His emphasis on fresh drew more snickers from the crowd. $2. Someone called out mockingly from the back. $3. If she comes with a feeding trough. Another voice joined, followed by more laughter. Silas felt something shift inside his chest, like ice breaking up on a spring river. The familiar weight of grief and isolation seemed to crack, letting through emotions he'd long buried, rage at the cruelty before him, and something else. Something that reminded him of holding his daughter's small hand, of his wife's trusting eyes before the fever took them both. The preacher tried once more to reach the platform, but 2 of Ezekiel's drinking buddies blocked his path. "The Lord will not forget this sin," he called out, his voice shaking with anger and helplessness. $4. A new voice called out, and Sarah Mae's head jerked up for the first time, horror washing across her tear-stained face as she recognized the voice of Boyd Tucker, a man old enough to be her grandfather, known for his mean treatment of horses and field hands alike. $4? The auctioneer affected an enthusiastic tone. "Do I hear $5? Think of all the work those strong arms could do." He reached out as if to pat Sarah May's shoulder, but she shrank away from his touch, nearly losing her balance on the platform. A woman in the crowd called out, "Someone give the poor thing a blanket at least. Ain't no one covering up the merchandise." Ezekiel shouted back, taking another drink. "Got to see what you're buying." This drew the loudest laughter yet, and Sarah May's quiet sobs became more desperate. Silas took one step forward, then another. The crowd seemed to sense his movement, people unconsciously shifting aside as his broad frame pushed through their midst. His scarred face remained impassive, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made those nearest him step back. $5, Boyd Tucker called again, licking his lips as he leered at the platform. Sarah May's legs trembled beneath her, and she swayed slightly. The afternoon sun had begun to burn her fair skin, adding physical pain to her shame. A fresh burst of cruel laughter erupted as someone in the crowd made another joke about her size. $5 from Mr. Tucker. The auctioneer's voice took on a practiced rhythm. Do I hear 6? Think of all the work she could do. Strong as a young mule, this one. Ezekiel Harper raised his bottle again, spilling some down his shirt front. Come on, folks. Surely she's worth more than a single horse, though she eats more than 3. His words slurred together, but the malice came through clear enough. The preacher had managed to push past one of Ezekiel's friends and was trying to shrug off the other's restraining hand. This is an abomination. She's a child of God. $6? Boyd Tucker called out again, his voice thick with anticipation. Silas reached the front of the crowd. His quiet voice cut through the noise like a well-honed knife. Stop. The single word carried enough authority that the auctioneer's next call died in his throat. Even Ezekiel's swaying stopped as he turned to face the mountain man. The crowd's attention shifted, sensing a change in the afternoon's entertainment. This ain't your business, Boone, Ezekiel said, trying to draw himself up straight, but listing slightly to one side. Go back to your mountain. Silas took another step forward, his boots heavy on the packed dirt. The girl. His voice remained level, but something in it made several people step back. How much? Ezekiel's bloodshot eyes narrowed. Since when do you care about anything? Sides your furs and your solitude. She ain't worth your time. Name your price. Each word fell like a stone into still water. The auctioneer looked between the two men, then cleared his throat. Well, current bid stands at $6. $50. Silas's voice remained quiet, but the amount drew gasps from the crowd. It was enough to buy a good horse or half a dozen head of cattle. Sarah May's head lifted slightly, her tear-filled eyes finding Silas's face with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She'd seen him before, on his rare trips into town, but he'd never so much as nodded in her direction. Ezekiel's face flushed red, either from the whiskey or anger. Now wait just a minute. $50, Silas repeated, reaching into his pack. In gold. He pulled out a small leather pouch, its contents clinking softly. The crowd murmured. $50 in gold was real money, the kind that could cover a lot of gambling debts or buy a lot of whiskey. Even Boyd Tucker fell silent, knowing he couldn't match the offer. Ezekiel swayed, looking from the pouch to his niece and back again. Greed warred with spite on his face. $75, he said finally, thinking he could push for more. Without a word, Silas reached into his pack again and pulled out another small pouch. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. That much gold would buy a small herd of cattle or pay for months of supplies. Ezekiel licked his lips, his eyes fixed on the pouches. She ain't worth your price, Silas said. Or I walk away. And you explain to your creditors why you turned down good gold? The mention of creditors made Ezekiel flinch. Everyone knew he owed money to dangerous men, the kind who didn't take kindly to late payments. He took another drink, nearly emptying the bottle, then nodded sharply. Done, he spat. Take her. She's your problem now. Silas climbed the steps to the platform, never taking his eyes off Sarah May's uncle. With deliberate movements, he set both pouches on the auctioneer's table. Then he shrugged off his heavy coat and stepped towards Sarah May, who trembled like a trapped animal. It's all right, he said softly, holding out the coat. His voice, rough from disuse, was gentle as he'd once spoken to spooked horses. No one's going to hurt you anymore. Sarah May stared at him for a long moment, then reached out with shaking hands to take the coat. It was warm from his body and smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. She pulled it around herself, the rough wool covering her from neck to knees. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that their entertainment had been cut short but wary of lingering under Silas's stern gaze. Boyd Tucker spat in the dust and stumped away. The preacher finally broke free of his captors and hurried toward the platform, his face filled with concern. Ezekiel snatched up the pouches of gold, clutching them to his chest. "No refunds," he sneered, though his voice shook slightly. "And don't come crying to me when you figure out what a waste of space she is." Silas turned to face him fully. Something in his expression made Ezekiel stumble back a step. "She's not coming back," Silas said quietly. "Ever. Remember that." The threat in those words was clear enough that even Ezekiel's whiskey-addled mind caught it. He nodded jerkily and almost ran down the platform steps, clutching his gold and his nearly empty bottle. Silas's quiet words hung in the air as Ezekiel stumbled away. The mountain man turned back to Sarah May, who stood trembling in his oversized coat. Her bare feet shifted on the rough wooden platform, and tears still traced silent paths down her cheeks. "Can you walk?" he asked softly. Sarah May nodded, though her legs felt weak as new spring grass. The coat wrapped around her like a fortress, its familiar frontier scents, pine sap, wood smoke, and leather, offering strange comfort. She took a hesitant step forward, clutching the heavy fabric close. The preacher hurried up the platform steps, his lined face tight with concern. "Mr. Boone," he began, "this situation needs proper doing." Silas finished, reaching into his pack once more. He pulled out a small canvas bag that clinked with the weight of coins. "For the paperwork, legal guardianship." The preacher's eyes widened slightly. It was well known that Silas Boone rarely carried more coin than needed for basic supplies. Yet here he stood, having already spent a small fortune to stop the auction, now offering more to make things proper. That would be best, yes." The preacher straightened his shoulders. "We can do it right now, if you'll both come to my office." Sarah May's head jerked up, her tear-stained face showing the first flash of hope. Legal guardianship meant protection, meant her uncle couldn't sell her again or drag her back to his homestead. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Thank you." Silas nodded once, then turned to face the remaining crowd. His voice carried across the town square, quiet but firm. "No man here will shame her further." It wasn't a request. The townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, many looking away. Some had participated in the cruel spectacle. Others had simply watched, but all had allowed it to happen. Now this mountain man, known for avoiding town affairs, had shown them their own failure. Silas gestured to the platform steps. "After you," he said to Sarah May, positioning himself between her and the crowd's lingering stares. She moved carefully, holding the coat closed with one hand while the other steadied herself on the rough railing. The preacher led the way across the square toward the small white church. Its weathered boards and simple cross stood as a reminder of higher laws than those that had allowed a young girl to be sold like cattle. A few curious onlookers followed at a distance, whispering among themselves. "Never thought I'd see the day," murmured Mrs. Peterson to her friend as they watched. "That Boone, taking on a ward, after what happened to his own." "Hush," her companion replied, though her eyes followed the unlikely pair. "But you're right. It ain't natural. Him being alone up there all these years. Then this." Other conversations rippled through the crowd. "Reckon he knows what he's doing. Girl that size. She'll eat him out of house and home. Better than letting Tucker have her, though. Wonder what made him do it." Silas ignored them all, keeping pace with Sarah May's hesitant steps. The dirt street felt rough under her bare feet, but she didn't complain. Anything was better than standing exposed on that platform, hearing the cruel laughter, feeling the burning shame. They reached the church's side door, which led to the preacher's small office. The room smelled of paper and dust, with afternoon sunlight streaming through its single window. A desk occupied one corner, its surface covered with neat stacks of documents and a well-worn Bible. "Please sit," the preacher said, gesturing to two straight-backed chairs. He began searching through a drawer, pulling out official-looking papers. "We'll need to document this properly." Sarah May perched carefully on one chair, making sure the coat covered everything. Silas remained standing, his tall frame making the small office feel even smaller. His shadow fell across the desk as the preacher began writing. "Full name?" the preacher asked, dipping his pen in ink. "Sarah May Harper," she replied softly. "Age? 15 years as of last spring." The preacher nodded, writing carefully. "And you, Mr. Boone? I'll need your Christian name for the documents." "Silas," he said simply. "Silas James Boone." The scratching of the pen filled the quiet room. Outside, they could hear the town slowly returning to its normal rhythm, though conversations still buzzed with news of what had happened. The preacher worked methodically, filling out 2 copies of the guardianship papers. "Now then," he said finally, looking up, "this document grants full legal guardianship to Mr. Boone until you come of age, Sarah May. Do you understand what that means?" She nodded, her hands clutching the coat tighter. He'll be my legal protection, like a father would be." "That's right. And Mr. Boone, you understand your responsibilities? To provide shelter, food, proper care?" "I do." Silas's voice was firm. The preacher held out the pen. "Then if you'll both sign here, Sarah May first, then Mr. Boone, and I'll witness it." Sarah May took the pen with trembling fingers. Her signature was shaky but legible, the ink slightly smeared where a tear fell on the paper. Silas's signature was surprisingly neat for a man who spent most of his time in the wilderness. The preacher signed last, then sprinkled sand over the wet ink. "There," he said, rolling up one copy and handing it to Silas. "Keep this safe. I'll file the other with the territory office when the circuit rider comes through." Silas tucked the document into his pack, then pulled out the promised coins. The metal clinked softly as he placed them on the desk. "For your trouble, and the filing fees. God's work needs no payment," the preacher said, but he took the coins anyway, though the territory office will want their share. He paused, then added more quietly, "Will you be heading straight up to your cabin?" "Need supplies first," Silas replied, "and proper clothes." The preacher nodded thoughtfully. "I'll speak to Mrs. Peterson. She might have some things that would fit, and she's discreet enough not to spread tales." Sarah May's shoulders hunched slightly at the mention of clothes to fit her size, but she didn't speak. The shame of the platform was still too fresh. "The livery stable's closest," Silas said. "We'll start there. My horse needs tending anyway." They stepped back outside, where the afternoon sun had begun its westward slide. The town seemed to hold its breath as they passed, faces appearing in windows and doorways. Sarah May kept her eyes down, but Silas walked with the same steady purpose that had carried him onto the auction platform. The livery stable's familiar smells of hay and horse leather wrapped around them as they entered its cooler shadows. Sarah May's bare feet found softer footing on the scattered straw. A bay gelding nickered softly from one of the stalls, recognizing his master. "Thank you," Sarah May whispered again, her voice barely louder than the horse's greeting. "I never thought." She trailed off, unable to find words for the turmoil of feelings. Silas paused in checking his horse's tack. "No need," he said gruffly, but not unkindly. No decent man could have stood by. "But they did," she said softly. "They all did, except you." The truth of that hung between them as Silas adjusted his saddle. Each step they took carried them further from the horror of the auction block, but its shadow would take longer to fade. Behind them, the town buzzed with speculation about the mountain man's unthinkable choice and what it might mean. For Sarah May, wrapped in the bearskin coat that smelled of wilderness and safety, each step was a small miracle. For Silas, whose quiet life of solitude had been shattered by one moment of fierce conviction, each step carried the weight of new responsibility. The afternoon sun slanted through the stable's high windows, turning dust motes to gold. Outside, life in Pine Bluff was already shifting to accommodate this strange new reality. The reclusive mountain man and the girl he'd claimed as kin, their fates now bound together by a choice that had taken mere moments but would echo through years to come. Evening shadows crept across Pine Bluff as Silas carried Sarah May into the livery stable. The wooden door creaked shut behind them, muffling the distant sounds of the town. Inside, horses shifted in their stalls, their soft snorts and the rustle of hay creating a gentle chorus. A single lantern hung from a beam, its light dancing across rough-hewn timbers and casting long shadows into the corners. Silas moved carefully between the stalls, mindful of his burden. Sarah May remained silent, clutching the bearskin coat around herself, her face half hidden in its thick fur. He found a clean hay bale near his horse's stall and set her down as gently as if she were made of china. "Stay put," he said quietly, his voice gravelly but kind. "I've got something that might help." Sarah May nodded, drawing her knees up to her chest. The coat enveloped her completely, its familiar wilderness scent of pine and wood smoke offering strange comfort. She watched as Silas moved to where his pack lay beside his saddle, his movements sure despite the dim light. The bay gelding reached over its stall door, nickering softly at its master. Silas paused to pat the horse's nose before returning with a worn wool blanket. The fabric was clean but well used, carrying its own stories of mountain nights and wilderness camps. "Here," he said, draping it over her shoulders atop the coat. "Double layer'll keep the chill off." "Thank you," Sarah May whispered, her voice barely audible above the horse's movements. The kindness in his actions made her throat tight with unshed tears. Silas dug in his pack again, producing a leather pouch of jerky and a battered canteen. He offered them both to her. "Reckon you should eat something." Sarah May shook her head, her stomach too knotted with shame and fear to consider food. The memory of the crowd's cruel laughter still rang in her ears, making her want to disappear entirely into the coat's furry depths. "Need to keep up your strength," Silas persisted, his tone gentle but firm. He held out a piece of jerky. "Just a bite or two. Won't do either of us any good if you faint from hunger." Her hand emerged hesitantly from the coat to take the dried meat. She nibbled at it carefully, realizing as the first taste hit her tongue that she hadn't eaten since early morning. The jerky was tough but flavorful, seasoned with whatever wild herbs Silas used in his preparation. "There's water too," he reminded her, setting the canteen within easy reach. "Drink slow, but drink plenty." Sarah May took small sips, the cool water soothing her parched throat. Each swallow helped wash away a little of the day's bitterness, though shame still sat heavy in her chest. She couldn't help glancing nervously at the stable door, half expecting her Uncle Ezekiel or one of his drunken friends to burst in at any moment. Silas noticed her, fearful looks. "You're safe now," he said firmly, settling himself on a nearby crate where he could watch both the door and the stable's back entrance. "Won't let anyone harm you." "But," Sarah May's voice quavered, "what if you decide to leave too? Everyone else?" She couldn't finish the thought, remembering how her own kin had dragged her to that awful platform. "I ain't everyone else," Silas replied, his scarred face serious in the lantern light. "Made a promise before God and the preacher. You're under my protection now, proper and legal." Before Sarah May could respond, the stable door opened with a creak. She startled, shrinking further into the coat, but it was only the preacher. He entered quietly, carrying a small bundle under one arm. "Mrs. Peterson sent these," he said, holding out the package to Sarah May. "Some clothes that should do for now. She said there's more if you need them." "That's kind of her," Sarah May murmured, touched by the unexpected thoughtfulness. The preacher's face grew serious as he turned to Silas. "We need to talk," he said in a low voice. "There's trouble brewing." Silas nodded toward the far end of the stable, where they could speak without Sarah May overhearing. But the livery's excellent acoustics carried their words back to her anyway. "The Harpers are stirring up sentiment at the saloon," the preacher warned. "And there's railroad men asking questions too. That land of Mary's near Willow Spring. Seems it might be more valuable than anyone knew." Sarah May's head came up at the mention of her mother's name. The homestead had been empty since Mary Harper's death 2 years ago, the deed never properly filed. "Water rights," the preacher continued. "There's talk the spring feeds more than just that little valley. Railroad's been buying up every water source they can find along the proposed line. That why they let Ezekiel Harper get so deep in debt at their gaming tables?" Silas asked quietly. "Hoping he'd sell them," Mary's claim. "Could be, but Mary left it all to Sarah May in her letter. Harper can't sell what ain't his to sell." Sarah May stared at them, stunned. She had never known the land meant anything special. It had just been home, the place where she and her mother had been happy before the fever took Mary away. Uncle Ezekiel had thrown her out soon after, claiming she was too expensive to feed. "You'll need to leave at first light," the preacher advised. "Take her up to your cabin until things settle." The Harpers won't dare follow you into the high country, and the railroad men won't know where to look. Silas nodded grimly. Plan 2 anyway. Town's no place for her right now. I'll file the guardianship papers as soon as the circuit rider comes through, the preacher promised. Make everything proper and legal, and I'll send word if I hear anything more about the land situation. He turned to go, then paused. God works in mysterious ways, Silas. Maybe saving her was about more than just doing right by a young girl in trouble. After the preacher left, silence fell in the stable except for the horses' quiet movements. The lantern flame had burned lower, casting deeper shadows into the corners. Sarah May's mind whirled with all she had learned. The land she had thought lost might be valuable enough to cause all this trouble. She found herself whispering prayers her mother had taught her, half-remembered words of comfort that seemed to rise naturally in the darkness. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Silas settled himself against a post, rifle laid across his knees. His eyes remained fixed on the stable doors, alert for any sound of approach. The night stretched out before them, full of uncertainty. But for the first time since her mother died, Sarah May felt truly protected. The lantern flame flickered, making shadows dance across the rough walls. Outside, the town's usual evening noises continued. Distant piano music from the saloon, the prouse dance across the rough walls, occasional shout or laugh, the rumble of wagon wheels. But here in the stable's quiet darkness, a fragile peace had descended. Sarah May curled deeper into the bearskin coat, its familiar scent now mixed with the sweet smell of fresh hay. Despite her fears and the day's horrible events, exhaustion began to creep over her. The solid presence of Silas nearby, steady as a mountain, helped ease her racing thoughts. His voice came softly through the shadows. Sleep if you can. I'll keep watch. She wanted to thank him again, to try explaining what his protection meant to her, but words failed her. Instead, she let her eyes close, the prayers still moving silently on her lips as she drifted into an uneasy slumber. Silas remained motionless at his post, one hand resting on his rifle, ears attuned to any sound that might mean danger. The night settled around them like a heavy blanket, full of possibilities both good and ill. But for now, in this moment, they were safe in the stable's shadowy embrace, waiting for dawn and whatever it might bring. Gray light crept over Pine Bluff as Silas led Sarah May through the livery's back door. The morning air bit cold and sharp, heavy with mountain dew. Silas had already saddled his iron-gray mule, its worn leather creaking as he secured the last of their supplies. He spoke quietly to the livery owner, pressing extra coins into the man's weathered palm for the loan of an older mare. A gentle beast with a dull brown coat and patient eyes. Sarah May stood uncertainly beside the horses, clutching her borrowed dress. Mrs. Peterson's clothes were plain but clean, though they pulled tight across her middle. The bearskin coat remained wrapped around her shoulders, its familiar weight now a comfort rather than a shield of shame. "Ever rode before?" Silas asked, his voice low to avoid echoing in the pre-dawn quiet. Sarah May shook her head, eyeing the mare's height with obvious worry. "Never had cause to," she whispered back. "Uncle, Ezekiel said I was too heavy for any horse to carry." A muscle twitched in Silas's scarred cheek, but his voice stayed gentle. "Sally here's steady and strong. She'll bear you just fine." He cupped his hands together to make a step. "Put your foot here and grab the saddle horn. I'll help you up." Sarah May hesitated, then placed her boot in his palms. With surprising grace, Silas lifted her as though she weighed no more than a flour sack, settling her firmly in the saddle. The mare shifted but held steady, showing no sign of strain. "There now," Silas said, adjusting the stirrups. "Keep your back straight and hold the reins loose. Sally knows her business." The town was just beginning to stir as they rode out. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and a rooster crowed in the distance. Through curtained windows, curious eyes watched their departure. Outside the general store, two women paused in their sweeping to whisper behind raised hands. The saloon doors swung open, spilling out a bleary-eyed miner who stared at them with unfocused surprise. Sarah May kept her eyes fixed between her mare's ears, trying to ignore the whispers that seemed to follow them down the street. Her thighs already ached from the unfamiliar position, and they had barely started. But she didn't dare complain, not when Silas had risked so much to help her. They passed the last scattered buildings and turned onto a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills. Pine Bluff fell away behind them, its morning sounds fading into the crunch of hooves on gravel and the whisper of wind through scrub oak. Sarah May found herself relaxing slightly as the town disappeared from view. The mare stumbled on a loose stone, making Sarah May lurch forward with a startled gasp. She clutched the saddle horn, face burning with embarrassment as she struggled to regain her balance. But Silas just reached over and steadied the reins, showing her how to shift her weight to help the horse. "Takes practice," he said, matter-of-factly. "You'll learn." They followed the trail as it curved around rocky outcrops and through stands of aspen. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Sarah May's muscles protested the constant movement, unused to riding. Every so often, Silas would point out landmarks, a lightning-struck pine that marked a turn, a distinctive boulder that meant water was near. As they paused to let the animals drink at a small spring, Sarah May gathered her courage. "Mr. Boone?" she asked hesitantly. "Why? Why did you help me? Back there in town?" Silas was silent for a long moment, staring at the water bubbling up from between moss-covered rocks. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with memory. "Had a daughter once," he said quietly. "Little thing named Grace. She and her mama took fever. Oh, must be 15 years back now." He ran a hand over his face, fingers trailing across the old scar. "Couldn't save them. Couldn't do nothing but watch them slip away." Sarah May sat very still, hardly daring to breathe as Silas continued. "When I saw you up on that platform yesterday, saw how they was treating you." His hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles showed white. "Couldn't stand by. Couldn't watch that kind of cruelty. Not again. Not when I could do something about it this time." "I'm sorry," Sarah May whispered. "About your family." Silas nodded once, sharply. "Past is past. Can't change it. But maybe we can do better going forward." He clicked to his mule, ending the conversation. "Come on. Storm's brewing up there. Need to make some miles before it hits." Sure enough, dark clouds were gathering over the peaks ahead, their edges torn by high winds. They pressed on, following the trail as it climbed higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, carrying the sharp scent of pine and coming rain. By early afternoon, they reached a shallow creek crossing. The water ran clear over smooth stones, no deeper than a horse's knees. Silas led the way, his mule picking carefully across the stream bed. Sarah May's mare followed, water splashing up to soak their boots. The crossing seemed to mark a boundary between the lower foothills and true mountain country. The trail grew steeper, switching back and forth across the face of the slope. Pines crowded closer, their branches reaching over the path. Sarah May found herself ducking to avoid low-hanging limbs. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Silas urged them on faster, looking for a suitable campsite before the storm hit. Just as the first fat drops began to fall, they came upon a grove of old-growth pines. The ground beneath the trees was carpeted with needles, creating a natural shelter. "We'll stop here," Silas announced, swinging down from his mule. He helped Sarah May dismount, steadying her as her legs threatened to buckle. "Need to get a fire going before this rain really starts." He showed her how to gather dry kindling from under the pine boughs, explaining which twigs would catch best. Sarah May followed his instructions carefully, determined to be useful. When she successfully struck a match and the kindling caught, sending up a bright flame, she couldn't help letting out a small laugh of triumph. The sound seemed to surprise them both, light and genuine, so different from the forced politeness she'd learned to hide behind. Silas's eyes crinkled at the corners, though he didn't quite smile. "Good job," he said simply, adding larger branches to build up the fire. They set up camp efficiently, Silas showing Sarah May how to help. The horses were unsaddled and picketed where they could graze. A simple lean-to of canvas provided shelter from the increasing rain. Soon they sat close to the flames, their wet boots steaming slightly as they dried. Silas pulled food from his saddlebags, more jerky, hard biscuits, and to Sarah May's surprise, a small sack of dried apples. He passed them to her without comment, but she noticed he kept glancing over, to make sure she was eating. For the first time in years, Sarah May didn't stop herself from taking seconds. No one was counting her portions or making cruel remarks about her appetite. The food was simple but filling, and the fire's warmth seeped into her tired muscles. Above them, Owls called back and forth through the darkness, their voices mixing with the steady patter of rain on pine needles. The flames crackled and popped, sending sparks swirling up into the night. Sarah May found herself growing drowsy, lulled by the peaceful sounds and the day's exhaustion. She pulled Silas's bearskin coat tighter around her shoulders, breathing in its familiar scent of wood smoke and pine. "Get some sleep," Silas said quietly. "Long ride tomorrow." Sarah May nodded, curling up on her bedroll beneath the lean-to. Despite her aching muscles and the strange surroundings, she felt oddly safe. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Silas's solid figure silhouetted against the firelight, keeping watch as he had promised. The sun climbed high overhead as Silas led them up a final switchback. Sarah May's mare plodded steadily behind his mule, both animals showing signs of fatigue from the steep climb. As they crested the ridge, a small clearing opened before them, and Sarah May caught her first glimpse of Silas's home. The log cabin sat nestled against the rocky ridge like it had grown there naturally, its rough-hewn walls weathered to a silvery gray. A tendril of smoke curled from the stone chimney, dancing against the backdrop of towering pines. A small vegetable patch, now overgrown with summer weeds, stretched along one side. Stacked firewood lined the other wall, covered with a lean-to of weathered planks. Silas dismounted first, his boots crunching on pine needles. He helped Sarah May down, steadying her as her legs trembled from the long ride. She stumbled slightly, grabbing his arm for support. "Easy now," he said quietly. "Take a moment to find your feet." While Sarah May stretched her aching muscles, Silas led the animals to a small corral beside the cabin. He removed their tack with practiced efficiency, checking them over for any signs of strain from the journey. The mare immediately dropped and rolled in the dust, making Sarah May smile despite her exhaustion. "Come on," Silas said, gathering their packs. "Let's get you inside." He pushed open the heavy wooden door, stepping back to let Sarah May enter first. She hesitated in the doorway, letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior. The cabin consisted of a single room, but it felt solid and well-crafted. A pot-bellied wood stove squatted in one corner, its pipe disappearing into the stone chimney. A rough-built bed frame stood against the far wall, topped with a stuffed mattress and several quilts. Shelves lined the walls, holding an assortment of tools, cooking implements, and supplies. A trunk sat beneath the room's single window, and Sarah May noticed a well-worn Bible resting on top of it. The whole space smelled of wood smoke, pine, and leather. "It ain't much," Silas said gruffly, setting down their packs. "But it's dry and warm." Sarah May wrapped her arms around herself, still wearing his bearskin coat. After the terror of the auction block and their hurried flight from town, the cabin's isolation felt like a blessing. Here, there were no jeering crowds, no cruel relatives, no prying eyes, just quiet and privacy, and the promise of safety. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's perfect." Silas busied himself at the wood stove, adding fuel and adjusting the damper. "You'll take the bed," he said, not looking up. "I'll make my pallet over here by the stove." "Oh, no, I couldn't," Sarah May protested. "You've already done so much. I can sleep on the floor. Won't hear of it." His tone brooked no argument. "You need proper rest after what you've been through." He moved around the cabin with the ease of long familiarity, gathering supplies for their evening meal. From a hook near the chimney, he took down a cast-iron pot and several bundles of dried herbs. A haunch of venison came next, wrapped in clean cloth. "Might as well teach you how to make a proper stew," he said, setting everything on the rough-hewn table. "Come here and watch." Sarah May approached hesitantly. Silas showed her how to cut the meat into even chunks, explaining which parts were best for slow cooking. He demonstrated how to layer flavors with dried herbs and wild onions, how much water to add, how to keep the fire at just the right temperature. "Now you try stirring it," he said, handing her the long wooden spoon. "Gentle-like, so nothing sticks to the bottom." Sarah May took the spoon carefully, mimicking his movements. The rich smell of simmering meat and herbs filled the cabin. Her stomach growled loudly, and she blushed, but Silas just nodded with approval. "Good appetite means you're healing," he said matter-of-factly. "Stew needs time to cook anyway. While we're waiting." He moved to the trunk beneath the window, opening it with care. After a moment of searching, He pulled out something made of faded calico. "Was my wife's?" he said quietly, holding out the dress. "Might not fit perfect, but it's clean and whole. Better than that coat for everyday wear." Sarah May took the dress with trembling hands. The fabric was soft with age and many washings, its pattern of tiny blue flowers still visible despite fading. She ran her fingers over careful mending at the seams, evidence of loving care. "There's a screen in the corner," Silas said, turning away to give her privacy. "You can change behind it. I'll tend the stew." Behind the wooden screen, Sarah May slipped out of the bearskin coat for the first time since the auction. The dress was indeed too small in some places, too large in others, but she managed to do up most of the buttons. When she emerged, Silas had his back turned, focused intently on the wood stove. A small tin mirror hung on the wall near the door. Sarah May approached it slowly, almost afraid to look. The girl who stared back at her was still too large, still marked by shame and fear, but she was covered, clothed, no longer naked, and exposed to cruel eyes and crueler laughter. Tears welled up suddenly, spilling down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quietly, but a small sob escaped. Silas turned at the sound, his scarred face concerned. "You all right?" he asked gruffly. Sarah May nodded, unable to speak. Outside, a wolf howled in the gathering dusk, answered by others deeper in the forest. The wild sound made her shiver slightly. Silas crossed to the wood stove and added another log. The fire crackled higher, pushing back the shadows that crept in through the cabin's single window. He straightened, his voice quiet but firm. "You're safe here," he said, meeting her eyes in the mirror's reflection. "I swear it. No one will ever leave you bare again, not while I draw breath." Sarah May hugged herself, feeling the soft calico under her fingers. The stew bubbled gently on the stove, filling the cabin with its homey smell. Outside, the wolves called to each other across the darkening mountains, but their voices seemed less frightening now. They were part of the wilderness that surrounded this place, this unexpected sanctuary where she had found the first fragile seeds of dignity and hope. The tears came faster now, but they were different somehow. Not tears of shame or fear, but of relief, of gratitude, of the tremendous weight of the past few days finally breaking free. Sarah May sank onto a nearby chair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Silas moved quietly around the cabin, giving her space to cry. He checked the stew, added more wood to the fire, arranged his bedroll near the stove's warmth. His presence was solid and steady, asking nothing, demanding nothing, simply being there as a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. When her tears finally slowed, he wordlessly handed her a clean handkerchief and a cup of water. Sarah May wiped her face, taking deep breaths of the pine-scented air. The wolves had fallen silent. Through the window, she could see the first stars appearing in the deep blue sky. "Stew's ready," Silas said, ladling generous portions into 2 tin bowls. "Best eat while it's hot." They sat at the rough table, the lamplight casting warm shadows on the log walls. Sarah May tasted the stew carefully. The meat was tender, the broth rich with herbs and wild onions. She smiled shyly at Silas, who nodded with satisfaction. "You did good with the stirring," he said. "Tomorrow I'll show you more cooking, if you've a mind to learn." "I'd like that," Sarah May whispered. She took another spoonful of stew, savoring its warmth. In this moment, surrounded by the cabin's quiet shelter, she felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Peace. The mountain morning dawned crisp and clear. Sarah May woke to the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood outside the cabin. She lay still for a moment, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeam that stretched across her borrowed bed. The sound continued steady, purposeful, somehow comforting in its regularity. Pushing back the quilt, she dressed quickly in the faded calico dress. Her fingers traced the soft fabric, still marveling at being properly clothed. Through the cabin's single window, she could see Silas at work in the yard, his broad shoulders swinging the axe in smooth arcs. Sarah May found the rough bristled broom in the corner and began sweeping the plank floor. Dust rose in clouds, making her sneeze, but she persisted. The simple task felt good, useful, normal, far removed from the horror of the auction block just days ago. The cabin door creaked open, and Silas entered, arms laden with split logs. "Morning," he said gruffly, setting the wood beside the stove. Thought we might try making bread today. Sarah May's eyes widened. I wouldn't know how. Time to learn then. He pulled a cloth-covered bowl from a shelf. Started the yeast rising before dawn. You'll need to knead it proper now. He showed her how to work the dough, demonstrating the pushing and folding motion. Sarah May's first attempts were clumsy, but she kept at it, determined to master this basic skill. Flour dusted her arms up to her elbows. Like this? She asked, pressing her weight into the dough. Silas nodded. That's the way. Bread making takes strength. He paused, watching her work. You've got good, strong arms for it. Sarah May faltered, remembering all the times her uncle had mocked her size. But Silas's tone held no cruelty, just simple observation. She straightened her shoulders and continued kneading, feeling the dough become smooth under her hands. Later, when the bread went into the oven too hot and came out scorched on the bottom, Sarah May's disappointment turned to surprised laughter at Silas's matter-of-fact response. Well, he said, examining the blackened loaf. Reckon we'll eat the top half and try again tomorrow. Nothing learned without mistakes. After the bread incident, Silas took her to the creek that ran behind the cabin. He demonstrated how to balance 2 wooden buckets on a yoke across her shoulders, showing her the easiest way to carry water up the slight slope to the cabin. Don't rush, he instructed. Steady pace gets the work done better than hurrying. Sarah May found that her size, so long a source of shame, actually helped with the task. Her broad shoulders supported the yoke well, and her strong arms managed the heavy buckets better than she expected. Each trip built her confidence a little more. In the afternoons, Silas taught her to mend clothing, his large hands surprisingly deft with needle and thread. A man alone needs to know such things, he explained, showing her how to patch a torn sleeve. Same as a woman alone. World's too hard to waste time wondering what's proper work for who. As evening approached each day, they would sit at the rough table with Silas's Bible between them. The lamplight cast warm shadows as Sarah May slowly sounded out the words, improving with each passage. Silas was patient, helping her with the harder terms, explaining meanings she didn't understand. My mama used to read to me, Sarah May said softly one night, running her finger along the worn page. But I can't remember her voice anymore. Just the feeling of being safe when she did. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Lost as that, he finally said. Takes the sharp memories first, leaves us with shadows and feelings, but those feelings matter. They tell us who we were loved by, even if we can't recall every detail. He spoke of his own travels then, describing winters spent trapping in the Bitterroot Mountains. His deep voice painted pictures of snow-laden pines, of valleys filled with mist, of nights so cold the stars seemed to crack. Sarah May listened, enchanted by these glimpses of a world so much larger than her own experience. On the third evening, as Sarah May was learning to stir a pot of beans without scorching them, a knock sounded at the cabin door. Silas answered it, revealing a middle-aged Cherokee woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, kind eyes. "Widow Lona," Silas greeted her. "Come in." The woman entered, carrying a basket that smelled of smoked fish and wild herbs. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, as she set her offering on the table. Her gaze fell on Sarah May, and something like recognition flickered across her face. "Mary Harper's child," she said softly. "I see your mother in your eyes." Sarah May's hand trembled on the wooden spoon. You knew my mother?" Widow Lona nodded, settling onto a chair. "I was midwife to her, helped bring you into this world. She was a good woman, your mother, respected the old ways, even as she made her own path." The older woman began, unpacking her basket, laying out wrapped portions of smoked fish and bundles of dried herbs. As she worked, she spoke of the land around Mary Harper's homestead, of the spring that had once watered Cherokee gardens before the railroad surveyors came with their instruments and their maps. "That water is sacred," Widow Lona explained, her voice taking on a deeper resonance. "It sustained my people's gardens for generations before the removal. Your mother understood this. She protected the spring, shared it freely with those who needed it." Sarah May sat down heavily, her mind whirling with this new knowledge. Is that why the railroad men want it? Is that why Uncle Ezekiel? She couldn't finish the sentence, the memory of the auction block still too raw. "The railroad hungers for water rights," Widow Lona confirmed. "They need it for their steam engines. for the towns they plan to build. They do not see the spring as sacred, only as something to be owned, controlled. She reached across the table and took Sarah May's flower, dusted hand in her own. Your mother left you more than just land, child. She left you a trust, a responsibility to protect what is precious. Silas, who had been quietly tending the fire, spoke up. The railroad men won't stop coming, will they? Widow Lona shook her head. They have papers, surveys, men with guns, but they do not have the deed to the spring. That lies unclaimed, waiting for Mary Harper's heir to file it proper. Her eyes met Sarah May's. That's you, child. Your worth is not measured by what cruel men say. It is tied to the land, to memory, to promises that must be kept. Sarah May looked down at her hands, strong hands that had kneaded bread, carried water, split kindling, hands that might now have a larger purpose than she'd ever imagined. The shame that had weighted her down for so long began to feel lighter, replaced by something new. Understanding. Widow Lona stayed through supper, teaching Sarah May how to prepare the smoked fish in the traditional way, showing her which herbs would help heal a wounded spirit. The older woman's presence filled the cabin with a sense of connection to the land, to the past, to a future that suddenly held more possibility than fear. As the evening deepened, the three of them shared the slightly burned bread and perfectly cooked fish. Widow Lona told stories of Sarah's mother as a young woman, of her kindness to Cherokee families passing through, of her fierce protection of the spring. Each word helped build a clearer picture of the woman Sarah May could barely remember, helping her understand that she had inherited more than just land. She had inherited a sacred trust. When Widow Lona finally rose to leave, she pressed a small bundle of herbs into Sarah May's hands. For strength, she said softly, and for remembering who you truly are. She touched Sarah's cheek gently. Your mother would be proud of the woman you're becoming. After the older woman had gone, Sarah May stood at the cabin's window, watching the moon rise over the dark trees. The bundle of herbs in her hands filled the air with a sweet, sharp scent. Behind her, Silas quietly banked the fire for the night. Reckon you've learned more than just bread making these past days, he said. Sarah May nodded, still looking out at the moonlit forest. I never knew, she whispered. About the spring, about Mama protecting it. All this time, I thought I was nothing but a burden. But she turned to face him, standing straighter than she had in years. I have a purpose now, something to protect, just like she did. Silas nodded gravely. And you won't be protecting it alone. The night wrapped around the cabin like a blanket, full of shadows but no longer frightening. Sarah May breathed in the herb-scented air, feeling the strength in her arms, the newfound dignity in her heart. She was Mary Harper's daughter, heir to a sacred spring, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly worthy of that inheritance. A week had passed since Widow Lona's visit when Silas announced they would attend Sunday service at the mountain church. Sarah May's hands trembled as she smoothed down her freshly mended dress, the same calico she'd worn all week, now fitting a bit better after her careful alterations. I don't know if I can face them, she whispered, standing in the cabin's doorway. The morning sun cast long shadows across the packed earth yard. Silas adjusted the horse's harness on their borrowed wagon. You ain't got nothing to be ashamed of, he said firmly. The shame belongs to them that did you wrong, not to you. The mountain road wound through stands of pine and aspen, their wagon wheels creaking over exposed roots and stones. Sarah May gripped the wooden seat as they descended, her heart beating faster with each mile that brought them closer to other people. She could already imagine their stares, their whispers. The church itself was a simple building of rough-hewn logs, its small steeple reaching toward the cloudless sky. Wagons and horses clustered around it, and the sound of voices carried on the breeze. Sarah May's breath caught as Silas helped her down from the wagon. Just as she feared, heads turned, conversations stuttered to silence. She heard the whispers start immediately cruel words about her size, about that terrible day at the auction block. Her cheeks burned, and she wanted nothing more than to flee back to the safety of Silas's cabin. But then Widow Lona appeared, her silver-streaked hair neat beneath a dark bonnet. She took Sarah May's arm as naturally as if they'd been friends for years. Come, she said warmly. Sister Martha's been hoping to meet you. The The preacher's wife was a small woman with laugh lines around her eyes. She clasped Sarah May's hands in welcome. "We've been praying for you, dear one," she said. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing you to Silas's protection." Inside the church, Sarah, May sat between Silas and widow Lona, drawing strength from their presence. The familiar rhythms of the service prayers, scripture readings, hymns washed over her like cool water. She found herself remembering fragments of these songs from her childhood, when her mother would hum them while working. After the service came the church supper, held in the adjoining meeting hall. Long tables groaned under covered dishes and steaming pots. Sister Martha approached Sarah May with a ladle in her hand. "Would you help serve the stew, dear? We're short-handed today." Sarah May glanced at Silas, who gave her an encouraging nod. Taking the ladle with slightly shaking hands, she took her place behind the pot of rich-smelling stew. One by one, people came forward with their bowls. Some avoided her eyes. Others stared too long. But she kept serving, focusing on each careful portion, on the simple task of filling empty bowls. Later, as people finished their meals, the preacher stood to make announcements. Then he smiled in Sarah May's direction. "I hear tell you know some hymns, child. Would you favor us with one?" The room went silent. Sarah May felt her throat close up with panic. But Silas was there, his quiet presence steady as a mountain. He nodded once, his eyes full of faith in her. Standing on trembling legs, Sarah May closed her eyes. For a moment, she was back in her mother's kitchen, listening to that beloved voice singing while kneading bread. The memory wrapped around her like a warm shawl, and she began to sing. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Her voice wavered at first, uncertain as a spring fawn, but with each note, it grew stronger. The hymn rose from deep within her, carrying all her pain, all her hope, all her newfound dignity. That saved a wretch like me. The hall fell completely silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Sarah May's voice filled every corner, clear and true, touching something in each listener's heart. "I once was lost, but now am found." She opened her eyes to see weather-worn men bowing their heads, women wiping tears from their cheeks. Widow Lona's face shone with pride, and Silas Tough, silent Silas, blinked rapidly, his scarred cheek wet with tears. "Was blind, but now I see." When the last note faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Sister Martha began to clap, and others joined in. Several of the widow women came forward to clasp Sarah May's hands, thanking her with voices thick with emotion. Not everyone was moved, of course. She could still see some of the town gossips in the corner, whispering behind their hands, sneering at her sighs. But somehow their cruel words seemed to have lost their power to wound her as deeply. The sun was setting as Silas helped her back into the wagon for the ride home. Stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine and sage. The horses' hooves made a steady rhythm on the mountain road. For a moment there, Sarah May whispered, watching the stars emerge one by one, "I forgot they ever laughed at me." Silas handled the reins with careful hands, his voice gentle in the gathering dusk. "That's the truth you hold on to," he said. "Not their cruel words, but the gift God gave you. That voice of yours, it touched hearts today, made them see you as he does." Sarah May pulled her shawl closer, remembering the feeling of the hymn rising from her soul, remembering the tears in rough men's eyes. For the first time since that terrible day at the auction block, she felt truly clean. The shame that had weighed her down seemed lighter, transformed by the simple act of raising her voice in praise. They rode on through the starlit evening, the wagon swaying gently beneath them. The mountain church fell away behind them, but Sarah May carried something new in her heart, the knowledge that she was more than what cruel people saw. She was a child of God, with a voice that could move hearts, with a spirit that could rise above shame. Silas guided the horses around a bend in the road, and their cabin's warm lights came into view through the trees. Sarah May touched the wooden cross hanging from her neck, a gift from Sister Martha, and smiled. The mountain air was sweet with possibility, and tomorrow was another day to grow stronger, to learn more, to become who she was meant to be. The morning dawned gray and cool, with low clouds clinging to the mountainside. Sarah May stood at the cabin's window, kneading bread dough while watching mist curl through the pines. 2 days had passed since the church supper, and her heart still warmed at the memory of singing that hymn. The peaceful morning shattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Sarah May's hands froze in the dough as 3 riders emerged from the fog. Their fine clothes and polished boots marked them as townsmen, not mountain folk. The man in front wore a black suit and derby hat, a land agent's typical attire. Silas appeared beside her, his expression grim. "Stay inside," he said quietly, but Sarah May followed him onto the porch anyway. She wouldn't hide, not anymore. The riders reined up in the yard, their horses' hooves churning the mud. The land agent dismounted first, his boots squelching in the wet earth. A gold watch chain glinted across his vest as he straightened his jacket. "Miss Harper," he said, tipping his hat with false politeness. "I represent the Western Railroad Company. We've come about your mother's property specifically, the deed to Willow Spring." Sarah May's throat went dry. Behind the agent, his 2 companions sat their horses with hands resting near their gun belts. Their eyes were cold, calculating. "I don't have any deed," she said, her voice smaller than she wished. "It was lost years ago, after Mama died." The agent's polite smile turned to a sneer. "How convenient. Well, my dear, without proper documentation, that land automatically reverts to public sale. The railroad has first claim on all unclaimed water sources in this territory." Silas stepped forward, his broad shoulders tense. "That spring's been Harper land for 15 years. Everyone knows it." "Knowing and proving are different matters," the agent said smoothly. "The law requires paper proof. Without it—" "The law?" A new voice cut through the morning mist. Widow Lona emerged from the tree line, her dark skirts brushing through wet grass. "You speak of law while ignoring treaty rights?" The agent's face tightened as Widow Lona climbed the porch steps to stand beside Sarah May. The Cherokee woman's presence seemed to fill the space with quiet strength. "That spring watered Cherokee gardens long before the Harper claim," Lona continued. "The Treaty of 48 specifically protects traditional water sources. Or does the railroad choose which laws to honor?" The agent's facade cracked. "Listen here, you. Choose your next words carefully," Silas warned, his hand moving to rest on his belt. A tense silence followed. The agent glanced at his companions, then forced another smile. "No need for unpleasantness. We're simply trying to establish legal ownership. But I should warn you, opposing the railroad's interests can have unfortunate consequences." He looked pointedly at the cabin. "Shame how many mountain homes burn each summer. Lightning, they say, or maybe just bad luck." Sarah May's hands trembled. She pressed them against her skirt to still them. "Get off my land," Silas said quietly. The menace in his voice made even the armed men shift uneasily in their saddles. The agent mounted up, no longer bothering to hide his contempt. "This isn't over. That cabin won't stand long, count on it." He wheeled his horse around, spitting into the mud. "You can't stop progress, old man. Best remember that." They watched the riders disappear into the mist. When the hoofbeats faded, Sarah May's legs gave way. She sank onto the porch, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought nothing but trouble. They'll burn you out because of me." Silas crouched beside her, his scarred face gentle. "No, child. They're the ones bringing trouble. Truth will shield us better than any lie they can tell." Widow Lona sat on Sarah May's other side, taking the girl's hand. "Your mother was wise to settle by that spring. She knew its worth went beyond paper deeds. Water is life itself. The railroad men understand that, even if they twist the law to steal it." They spent the afternoon securing the cabin. Silas checked his rifle, cleaned his pistol, and brought extra ammunition from his storage chest. As evening approached, rain began to fall, drumming steadily on the roof. After supper, Silas took down his spare rifle, an old but well-maintained piece. "Time you learn to use this," he told Sarah May. "Prayer is our first defense, but sometimes the Lord expects us to defend ourselves." Sarah May held the weapon awkwardly, afraid of its deadly weight, but Silas was patient, showing her how to load, aim, and clean it properly. "It's a last resort," he emphasized. "But better to know and not need than need and not know." The rain grew heavier as night settled in. They sat by the fire, listening to water stream off the eaves. Widow Lona had stayed, saying she felt safer with them than alone in her cabin. She taught Sarah May to make healing salves from her herbs, explaining each plant's purpose. "Courage isn't about being unafraid," Lona said as she worked. "It's about facing fear with truth in your heart. Your mother understood that. She faced down claim jumpers twice before you were born." Sarah May looked up in surprise. "She never told me." "She was protecting you," Silas said softly. "Like she protected that spring. Some things are worth fighting for." They talked late into the night about courage, faith, and the strength found in standing together. The rain fell steady and strong, but inside the cabin was warm with shared purpose. Sarah May felt her earlier panic giving way to something stronger, a determination to honor her mother's legacy, to protect what was right. When they finally prepared for sleep, Widow Lona insisted on taking the pallet by the stove, leaving Sarah May the bed. Silas sat in his chair by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the rainy darkness. "Sleep," he told them. "I'll keep first watch. The Lord's watching too, mind you, but he appreciates a helping hand now and then." Sarah May lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain and Widow Lona's soft breathing. The spare rifle stood within reach beside her bed, its presence both comforting and frightening. She thought of her mother, standing brave against claim jumpers. She thought of Silas, choosing to defend her that day at the auction block. She thought of Widow Lona, facing down the agent with nothing but truth and treaty rights. Perhaps courage, like faith, grew stronger when shared. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the mountain air clean. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she was no longer alone to face it. That thought, more than anything, finally allowed her to close her eyes and rest. The mountain air carried a chill that morning, frost sparkling on the cabin's window panes. Sarah May sat at the rough-hewn table, her fingers tracing the wood grain as she watched Silas prepare for another scouting trip. Every sound from outside made her jump, a branch scratching against the roof, a jay's harsh call, the wind rattling the door latch. Silas shouldered his rifle, checking the ammunition in his belt for the third time. "Won't be gone long," he said, his voice gentle. "Keep the door barred." Widow Lona said she'd stop by midday. Sarah May nodded, trying to hide her trembling hands in her lap. Since the railroad men's threat, sleep had become fragile, broken by every nocturnal sound. Even now, dark circles shadowed her eyes. "I hate being afraid all the time," she whispered. Silas paused at the door, his weathered face softening. "Fear's natural as breathing when trouble comes, but it ain't your master unless you let it be." After he left, Sarah May tried to keep busy. She swept the cabin floor, though it was already clean. She reorganized the herbs Widow Lona had left, though they were properly stored. Every few minutes, her eyes darted to the windows, searching for movement in the trees. The morning stretched long and quiet. Sarah May sat in Silas's chair by the window, a worn Bible in her lap. She tried to read, but the words blurred as tears welled up. Everything felt heavy, her body, her heart, the burden she'd brought to Silas's peaceful life. When Silas returned hours later, he found her still there, crying silently. He set his rifle aside and pulled up a stool beside her. "What's troubling you, child?" His voice was soft, like he used when approaching spooked horses. Sarah May wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm sorry. I just keep thinking about everything, about being a burden to you, about how no man will ever." She swallowed hard. "No man will ever look at me with kindness, not being the size I am." The whole town laughed that day, and they were right too. "Stop right there." Silas's tone was firm but gentle. "That's shame talking, not truth. But look at me." Sarah May gestured at herself, fresh tears falling. "I'm too big, too clumsy. Everyone says, a person's weight don't measure their worth." Silas interrupted. "God's hand does, and he made you exactly as he meant to." Sarah May stared at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. Silas continued, his scarred cheek twitching with emotion. "You think I don't know about shame? This face of mine scared my own daughter first time she saw it after the bear attack, but she learned to see past it, because love looks deeper than flesh." He reached out, hesitantly, and patted her hand. "You've got a heart big enough to match your size, girl. That's what matters. I've heard you singing them hymns, voice pure as mountain spring water. Seen you learning to cook and clean and split wood without complaint. Watched you face down them railroad men with courage, even through your fear. Sarah May's tears slowed as she listened. The world's got mean ways of measuring folks, Silas said. But God's got his own scale, and you weigh plenty fine on that one. Before Sarah May could respond, a knock at the door made them both start. But it was Widow Lona's familiar pattern, 3 quick taps, then 2 slow. The Cherokee woman entered carrying a bundle wrapped in clean cloth. Her dark eyes took in Sarah May's tear-stained face, and understanding softened her expression. "I brought something," she said, setting the bundle on the table. "Been saving these goods for a special purpose. Reckon this is it." She unwrapped the package, revealing lengths of soft calico fabric in deep blue and cream colors, along with thread, buttons, and other sewing notions. "Time you had a proper dress," Lona said. "One that fits right and makes you feel like the young woman you are." Sarah May touched the fabric reverently. "But I don't know how to sew very well. That's why I'm here to teach you." Lona smiled. "Every woman should know how to dress herself with dignity." Silas cleared his throat. "Reckon that's my cue to make myself scarce. Got more scouting to do anyway." After he left, Widow Lona and Sarah May spent hours measuring, cutting, and stitching. As they worked, Lona shared stories of her own journey to womanhood, of learning to balance Cherokee traditions with frontier life. "Being different isn't easy," Lona said as she showed Sarah May how to gather the skirt. "But it can be a strength, if you let it be. My people know that beauty comes in many forms, like flowers in a meadow, each one unique, each one perfect in its own way." The afternoon light softened as they worked. Sarah May's fingers grew more confident with each stitch. Lona taught her Cherokee words for the colors they used, for the act of creating, for the bonds between women who help each other grow. "My mama used to sew," Sarah May said quietly as they attached the bodice. "I remember watching her fingers move, quick as birds, but she never had time to teach me before." "She's teaching you now," Lona replied. "Through my hands, through your own learning. That's how women's wisdom passes down, like water flowing from spring to stream to river." As sunset approached, they finished the dress. Sarah May changed behind the privacy screen Silas had built her. When she emerged, the dress fit perfectly, neither too tight nor too loose. The blue brought out the warmth in her skin, and the cream trim highlighted her gentle curves without shame. Lona stepped back, smiling. "Now that's a proper young woman I see before me." Sarah May turned slowly before the tin mirror, hardly recognizing herself. For the first time, she saw grace in her reflection instead of awkwardness. The dress embraced her size instead of fighting it, making her feel dignified instead of hidden. Silas returned just then, stamping snow from his boots. He stopped short at the sight of her, his eyes growing bright with unshed tears. "Well now," he said gruffly, "ain't you a picture? Reminds me of them wild roses that bloom up high where nobody expects to find beauty." Sarah May blushed, but she stood straighter, accepting the compliment. Outside, coyotes began their evening chorus, their wild songs echoing off the ridge. But inside the cabin, lamplight caught the copper tea kettle's gleam and made shadows dance on the log walls. Lona brewed tea with herbs from her garden while Sarah May set out cornbread and honey. They sat together, this unlikely family, sharing the simple meal. Laughter came easier now, warming the space between them like the fire's glow. Silas leaned back in his chair, watching Sarah May and Lona discuss plans for a vegetable patch come spring. Something eased in his chest, a knot of grief he'd carried since his daughter's death. It wasn't that Sarah May replaced that loss, no one could, but love had found its way back into his life, like sunshine through storm clouds. He recognized the peace settling over him. It was the feeling of belonging, of family chosen rather than born. Sarah May's smile, Lona's quiet wisdom, the simple rightness of sharing a meal, these things filled spaces he'd thought would stay empty forever. The coyotes sang on, their voices wild and free in the gathering dark. But the cabin glowed with warmth and fellowship, a beacon of hope in the wilderness. Here, in this space made sacred by acceptance, Sarah May had found her place. Not as a burden to be endured, but as a daughter to be cherished. A woman coming into her own strength. Like the dress that now fit her truly, she had grown into herself not by becoming less, but by learning to embrace all that she was. In Silas's gruff kindness and Lona's gentle guidance, She had found mirrors that reflected back her worth, unclouded by the world's harsh judgments. The evening deepened into night, wrapped in quiet contentment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, peace reigned in the cabin on the ridge, where three souls had found shelter in each other's grace. The howl came first, a single dog's warning bark that split the midnight silence. Then another joined, and another, until the mountain night filled with their urgent chorus. Sarah May bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding. Through the cabin's small window, she caught a flash of movement in the moonlight riders, their faces hidden. Before she could cry out, the first bottle crashed through the window. Glass shattered as flames erupted, spreading across the dry wooden floor with terrifying speed. The sharp stench of coal oil filled the air. "Sarah," Silas's voice boomed through the smoke. "Get out, now." She scrambled from the bed, choking as thick smoke filled her lungs. More bottles sailed through the windows, bringing fresh waves of fire. The roof crackled ominously above them. Silas appeared through the haze like a giant, grabbing her arm. "Cover your face." He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and half-dragged her toward the door. Behind them, flames devoured the bedding where she had slept moments before. They burst out into the cold night air. Sarah May gulped deep breaths, her eyes streaming. Through her tears, she saw several riders wheeling their horses around, their laughter carrying on the wind. The railroad men's threat had not been empty. "No!" The cry tore from her throat as she watched flames climb the cabin's walls. Without thinking, she yanked the blanket from her shoulders and began beating at the fire near the door. "Sarah, stop!" Silas pulled her back. "It's too late." A tremendous crack split the air as burning timber gave way. The roof began to cave in, sending a shower of sparks toward the sky. Sarah May watched in horror as their home, her first true home, collapsed in on itself. Silas darted forward, braving the heat to snatch his rifle from beside the door where he always kept it. He disappeared around the side of the burning cabin and returned moments later with the family Bible and the bundle of cloth Widow Lona had brought earlier. The heat drove them back as the flames rose higher. Sarah May sank to her knees in the mud, coughing violently. "This is my fault," she choked out between spasms. "They came because of me, because of that spring. I should never have stayed. I've ruined everything." Thunder rolled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Silas stood rigid, watching their home burn, his scarred face terrible in the firelight. His hands clenched and unclenched around his rifle. "Silas?" Sarah May's voice quavered as she recognized the rage building in him. She had seen that same look in her uncle's eyes before violence erupted. "Please, please don't." He didn't seem to hear her. His finger traced the rifle's trigger guard as the rain fell harder. "I could track them," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Follow their trail while it's fresh. Make them pay." Sarah May struggled to her feet, her wet dress clinging to her legs. She gripped his arm with both hands. "Don't become like them," she pleaded. "Don't let hate win. Please, I can't lose you too." Something in her voice reached him. He looked down at her tear-streaked face, and some of the murderous fury left his eyes. "You're right," he said roughly. "Vengeance is the Lord's business, not mine." But his hand still trembled on the rifle. The rain fell steadily now, drumming on the smoldering ruins. Steam rose where water met hot timber, creating ghostly shapes in the darkness. Sarah May couldn't stop shaking, as much from shock as from cold. Silas led her to a massive pine tree whose thick branches had kept the ground beneath relatively dry. They huddled there together, watching their home burn down to ashes. Sarah May clutched Lona's bundle of fabric to her chest, one of the few things they had managed to save. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again. "Everything you built, everything you gave me, it's all gone because of me." Silas was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ruins. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "You remember what I told you earlier? About worth?" Sarah May nodded, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Well, same truth holds here. A home ain't just timber and nails. It's the people in it. They can burn the cabin, but they can't burn what matters, not unless we let them." He opened the saved Bible, its leather cover slightly scorched. "See here? Words still read true, even with singed pages. Same with us. We're a mite singed, but not destroyed." Sarah May leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. The rain continued falling, washing away the smoke smell, dousing the last of the flames. In the distance, a whippoorwill called 3 clear notes that seemed to defy the darkness. They stayed under the pine until false dawn began to lighten the sky. Sarah May had dozed fitfully against Silas's shoulder, but he remained awake, rifle across his knees, watching through the rain. As gray light crept over the ridge, they could finally see the full extent of the destruction. Where their snug cabin had stood was now a black rectangle of ashes and charred logs. The stone chimney stood alone, a sentinel over the ruins. Even the vegetable patch Sarah May had planned with widow Lona was trampled by the raiders' horses. She walked slowly through the wreckage, heart aching at each reminder of their lost home, the melted remains of her tin mirror, the twisted frame of her bed, the shattered crockery that had held last night's dinner. Everything that had made the cabin warm and welcoming was gone. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small against the vast morning sky. Before Silas could answer, they heard hoofbeats approaching. He raised his rifle, but then lowered it as widow Lona appeared through the morning mist, riding her paint pony. She took in the scene with one sharp glance. "I saw the flames from my cabin," she said, dismounting. "But the rain was too heavy to ride until now." Her dark eyes flashed. "Railroad men?" Silas nodded grimly. "Then they'll be back," Lona said. "They won't stop until they have the spring." She turned to Sarah May. "Come, both of you. My cabin's small, but it will shelter us while we decide what to do next." Sarah May looked at Silas, who was staring at the ruins of his home, the home he had built after losing his wife and daughter, the home he had opened to her when she had nothing. "We'll rebuild," he said finally, touching the Bible in his coat pocket. "Somewhere they won't find us. But first, we need to prove Sarah's claim to that spring. It's time to find that missing deed." The sun broke over the ridge then, catching the rain-washed world in golden light. Sarah May watched it shimmer on the wet ashes of their home. She thought of all that had been lost, but also of what remained. Silas's protection, Lona's wisdom, and her own growing strength. They had saved so little from the fire, a rifle, a Bible, and a bundle of cloth. But as she looked at Silas and Lona standing beside her in the dawn light, she realized that perhaps they had saved everything that truly mattered after all. The road ahead would not be easy. The railroad men would return, and the spring's ownership still hung in doubt. But for now, they were together, and they were alive. Sometimes, Sarah May was learning. That was enough of a foundation to build on. Dawn crept over the mountain ridge, painting the ruins in pale golden light. The cabin's remains stood stark against the morning sky, blackened beams reaching up like broken fingers, the stone chimney rising alone above the ashes. Sarah May huddled on widow Lona's porch, clutching a tin cup of hot tea, watching as the first neighbors began arriving. The preacher's wagon creaked up the trail, followed by 3 widows from the mountain church. They carried baskets and buckets, faces grim but determined. Widow Lona had ridden out at first light to spread word of the attack. Now she stood beside Sarah May, one weathered hand resting on the girl's shoulder. "Bless you all for coming," Silas called out, his voice rough from smoke and sleeplessness. He had spent the night pacing, checking his rifle, until Lona ordered him to rest. The preacher climbed down from his wagon, his usually neat collar stained with trail dust. "The Lord commands us to bear one another's burdens," he said simply. "Where shall we start?" They began sifting through the ruins, careful of hot spots still smoldering beneath the surface. The widows organized themselves with the efficiency of women long used to hardship, setting up a makeshift camp kitchen under a pine tree. Soon the smell of coffee mixed with the bitter scent of wet ashes. Sarah May worked alongside them, her hands growing black with soot as she searched through the wreckage. Every broken dish and charred timber brought fresh pain, memories of meals shared, prayers spoken, moments when she had finally felt safe. Her new dress, sewn with such care and hope, was already stained and torn from the night's horror. "Here's your mother's cup," one of the widows called out, holding up a cracked piece of china. Sarah May took it carefully, running her thumb over the singed blue flowers, another small piece of her past, damaged but not completely destroyed. They worked through the morning, salvaging what they could. Silas found his trap-making tools, barely damaged in their metal box. The Bible had survived thanks to his quick thinking, though its pages were rippled from rain. But the item they most hoped to find, her mother's deed to Willow Spring, remained elusive. As the sun climbed higher, Silas's frustration grew visible in the set of his shoulders. The harsh way he tossed aside ruined boards. "Enough," he said finally, straightening up. "Time to settle with those railroad men proper." The preacher looked up sharply from where he was examining a fallen beam. "Brother Silas, vengeance belongs to the Lord. The Lord helps those who help themselves." Silas shot back, his scarred face dark with anger. "You didn't see them, preacher, laughing as they rode away, while our home burned, while that child—" He broke off, fists clenching. Sarah May stopped her searching, heart pounding. She had seen that look before, in her uncle's eyes before the beating started. But Silas wasn't like that, was he? The preacher set down the beam and walked over to Silas, unafraid of the bigger man's rage. "There's a better way," he said quietly. "The courthouse in Miller's Creek has copies of all land records. If Sarah May's mother filed that deed, it'll be recorded there. We can fight them with the law, brother. Don't let them turn you into what they are." Silas's hands slowly unclenched. He looked over at Sarah May, and something in her expression seemed to reach him. The murderous anger faded from his eyes, replaced by shame. "You're right, preacher," he said roughly. "I apologize for my harsh words. It's just—" He gestured at the ruins, at Sarah May's soot-stained face. "Ain't right what they did. Someone needs to stand against it. And we will," the preacher assured him. "But we'll do it properly, with faith and law on our side. The railroad may have money and men, but they don't own justice itself." Sarah May listened to their words, wanting to believe but finding it hard. The law had never protected her before. It hadn't stopped her family from dragging her onto that auction block, hadn't punished them for years of cruelty. Even now, the men who burned their home would likely go free. One of the widows must have read her thoughts in her face. "Things are different now, child," she said gently. "You've got folks standing with you. That changes everything." As if to prove her words, more neighbors arrived throughout the day. They brought food, tools, offers of shelter. Even those who had once whispered about her now worked alongside her, sharing their strength. Sarah May found herself blinking back tears at their kindness. By late afternoon, they had salvaged everything possible from the ruins. It wasn't much: some tools, cooking pots, the singed Bible, and a few pieces of clothing. The rest was ashes, scattered by the mountain wind. They gathered in Widow Lona's cabin as evening approached. It was cramped with so many people, but somehow that made it feel safer. The widows had prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Sarah May sat between Silas and Lona, drawing comfort from their presence. "We'll ride to Miller's Creek tomorrow," the preacher announced over supper. "The courthouse opens at 9 o'clock. Sarah May, you'll need to come with us to make your claim." She nodded, though her stomach clenched with fear at the thought of facing officials, of having to prove her worth once again. Silas must have sensed her anxiety. "I'll be right beside you," he promised. "Won't let you face this alone." After the others left, Sarah May helped Lona clean up while Silas checked the horses. The cabin felt different in the darkness. Strange shadows danced on the low rafters, cast by the lamp's flickering light. Sarah May found herself watching them, remembering how flames had danced on their own cabin's roof. "Sometimes I think God must be punishing me," she whispered, not meaning to speak aloud. "For being what I am, for bringing trouble to good people like Silas." Widow Lona set down her dishcloth and took Sarah May's hand in both of hers. The older woman's skin was rough from work but warm with life and strength. "Listen close, child," she said. "Sometimes fire comes not as punishment, but as clearing, like spring burning that makes way for new growth. My people knew this, how flames can prepare ground for stronger roots." She squeezed Sarah May's hand. "You are not being punished. You are being prepared." From his place by the door, Silas listened to Lona's words. Some of the restless anger left his face, replaced by thoughtfulness. Still, his hand strayed to his rifle, and his eyes kept moving to the window, watching the darkness beyond. Sarah May studied their faces in the lamplight, Lona's quiet wisdom, Silas's fierce protection. She thought of the neighbors who had come to help, of the preacher's promise of justice. Perhaps Lona was right. Perhaps this fire, terrible as it was, had shown her something important. She was no longer alone. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the night. 3 clear notes, bold and unafraid. Sarah May straightened her shoulders, trying to find that same courage within herself. Tomorrow, they would ride to Miller's Creek, to face the railroad men and their power. She didn't know if they would win, but for the first time in her life, she knew she had people who would stand beside her, come what may. Lona began humming as she worked an old Cherokee melody that seemed to wrap around them like a blanket, soft and strong. Sarah May recognized it as a song of hope, of new beginnings. She joined in hesitantly, her voice finding strength as it twined with Lona's. Even Silas's restless movements stilled as he listened. The lamp burned low, casting their shadows on the wall, three people brought together by hardship, now bound by something stronger than blood. Outside, the night wind stirred the ashes of their old home. But here, in this cramped cabin filled with song and warmth, Sarah May felt the first seeds of something new taking root. The next days brought a flurry of preparation. Inside Widow Lona's cabin, the preacher sat with Sarah May at the rough-hewn table, helping her find the right words for court. "Speak clear and steady," he advised, watching her twist her hands in her lap. "Remember, you have truth on your side." Sarah May nodded, though her voice still quavered. "I, Sarah May Harper, do claim my mother's homestead at Willow Spring." Widow Lona sat nearby, weaving a story between Sarah's practice sessions. "Water is life itself," she said softly. "The spring your mother claimed, it watered our gardens long before paper deeds existed. You protect not just land, but life's very source." In the evenings, Silas worked quietly by the fire, his knife carefully shaping a small wooden cross. When finished, he handed it to Sarah May. "Something to hold on to," he said gruffly, "when words feel heavy." They gathered each night to pray, their voices mixing in the lamplight. Sarah May stood straighter each day, though shame still weighed on her shoulders. Watching her progress, Silas felt his heart swell with unexpected pride. She was growing stronger, braver like his own daughter might have been. Then came the telegram that changed everything. The messenger rode up, just past noon, dust coating his horse's flanks. The railroad's lawyers were pushing for immediate judgment. They must appear in Pine Bluff at dawn. Sarah May's face went white. "So soon? I'm not ready." Silas gripped her shoulder gently. "We'll walk into that hall together," he promised. "Not one step alone." Dawn painted the sky in pale strips of gold as Silas and Sarah May rode toward Pine Bluff. Their horses' hooves squelched through mud, each step bringing them closer to judgment. Sarah May clutched the wooden cross in her pocket, drawing strength from its rough edges. The courthouse loomed ahead, its weathered boards dark with morning dew. Already, a crowd gathered, stern-faced railroad men in pressed suits, townsfolk whispering behind raised hands, and the Harper clan, sullen-eyed and reeking of whiskey. Inside, the benches creaked under the weight of so many bodies. Sarah May's uncle Ezekiel Harper sat near the front, his face twisted in a familiar sneer. The land agent adjusted his silk tie, papers spread before him like weapons. When they called Sarah May to the stand, her legs trembled so badly she could hardly walk. The wooden chair felt cold beneath her. She gripped her skirts, fighting the urge to flee. "Tell us about Willow Spring," the judge prompted. Sarah May's voice came out thin at first. "Mama loved that land more than anything. She'd take me there at sunset. Tell me how the water brought life to everything it touched." Her words grew stronger as memories flowed. "We planted corn, kept chickens, made a real home." Laughter rippled through the crowd when she mentioned her mother. Someone whispered, "Harper trash." The preacher stood suddenly, his voice sharp as a whip. "Silence. This is God's justice we seek today." The land agent rose, smooth as silk. "No deed exists," he declared. "The girl's claims are worthless as she is." Sarah May felt her throat closing, shame rising like floodwater. Then she felt Silas's strong hand on her shoulder, steady as stone. Something shifted inside her. She straightened her spine, raised her chin, and looked directly at the sneering faces before her. "I am not shame," she declared, her voice ringing clear as a church bell. "I am my mother's daughter." The words echoed in sudden silence. Even the Harper clan stopped muttering. Sarah May saw something flicker in her uncle's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of the sister he'd lost. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The judge cleared his throat, shuffling papers on his desk. Without proper documentation, I have no choice but to— Wait, the preacher's voice rang out. He strode forward, his weathered Bible clutched to his chest. There's something you need to see, Your Honor. Every eye in the courtroom followed as he opened the Bible's worn leather cover. From between its pages, he withdrew a yellowed envelope, sealed with wax and stained by time. Mary Harper came to me 7 years ago, the preacher explained, his voice thick with emotion. She feared her husband would destroy this deed in one of his drunken rages. Asked me to file it properly. He placed the document on the judge's desk. I did so, in secret, to protect her and young Sarah May. The judge broke the seal, unfolding the paper with careful fingers. The railroad lawyers crowded forward, faces growing pale as they read over his shoulder. The land agent's confident smirk crumbled. This deed is properly filed and witnessed, the judge announced. According to these documents, the Willow Spring property, including all water rights, belongs to Sarah May Harper through her mother's estate. He adjusted his spectacles. Furthermore, the treaty provisions clearly state these waters cannot be seized or diverted. Ezekiel Harper leaped to his feet. That's our land, he shouted, face red with fury. My sister had no right. Sit down, the sheriff barked, hand on his gun belt. Or spend the night in my jail. Sarah, May's legs gave way. She sank against Silas, tears streaming down her face. His strong arm held her steady as scattered applause broke out among the townsfolk. Widow Lona smiled from her seat, nodding in quiet satisfaction. The court recognizes Sarah May Harper as the rightful owner, the judge declared, bringing down his gavel. Case dismissed. The railroad men gathered their papers, muttering darkly as they fled the courthouse. The Harpers stormed out, boots thundering on wooden floors, but Sarah barely noticed. She was crying into Silas's coat, years of fear washing away with each tear. Your mama would be proud, Silas whispered, his own voice rough with emotion. She kept you safe, even after she was gone. Around them, townspeople pressed close, offering congratulations and smiles where once they had only given scorn. The mountain air rang with the steady thunk of axes and the scrape of saws against pine logs. Neighbors from all around had gathered to help rebuild Silas and Sarah's cabin, their voices calling back and forth across the clearing as they worked. Sarah heaved another log into place, her muscles burning but her heart light. Sweat dampened her hair, but she didn't mind. This was honest work, building something that belonged to her. Silas watched from where he was fitting wallboards, pride warming his chest as she directed 2 young men where to place support beams. The crosspiece needs to be higher, she called out, gesturing with confidence. That way the roof won't sag when snow comes. Silas barely recognized her as the trembling girl he'd rescued months ago. Her voice rang clear now, her shoulders straight. Even her size seemed different, not a source of shame, but a well of strength as she lifted and carried alongside the others. Widow Lona worked with the women, laying stone for the new hearth. Her weathered hands placed each rock with care, humming Cherokee blessing songs under her breath. When the spring-fed well was dug, she gathered everyone around it. These waters, she declared, sprinkling dried herbs across the surface. They flow for justice now, for healing, for hope. Her dark eyes met Sarah's. They remember your mother's love, child. Tears glinted in Sarah's eyes, but she stood tall. As sunset painted the sky amber, the preacher raised his hands over the finished cabin. Lord, he prayed, bless this home built by many hands. Let it stand as testament to your mercy and the strength of hearts joined in love. Inside, the new hearth crackled with its first fire. Sarah hung the wooden cross Silas had carved above the mantel, her fingers tracing its simple lines. The flames cast dancing shadows on fresh-hewn walls that smelled of pine and promise. They sat together on a bench Silas had fashioned, watching sparks rise up the chimney. The warmth that filled the cabin came not just from the fire, but from the knowledge that they were no longer alone. Every board, every stone, every stitch of the curtains Widow Lona had sewn spoke of belonging. Sarah leaned against Silas's shoulder, safe in the quiet. Fear had no place here anymore, only hope, burning steady as the hearth fire before them. The mountain ridge glowed with dozens of lanterns, their soft light pushing back against the pre-dawn shadows. Dew sparkled on spring grass as families gathered, their boots leaving dark prints in the moisture. The air held that special stillness that comes before sunrise, broken only by whispered greetings and the rustle of Sunday clothes. Silas stood near the back, his weathered hands clasped before him. His usual buckskins had been traded for clean work clothes, though his scarred face still marked him as a mountain man. Yet there was something different in his bearing now, a peace that had settled into his bones, replacing the old loneliness. Widow Lona arranged blankets on logs for the elderly, her dark shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. She caught Silas's eye and nodded, both of them remembering darker days when healing seemed impossible. The preacher raised his hands, and voices lifted in the first hymn. Amazing Grace floated across the ridge, carrying with it all the hurt and hope of their small community. Lantern flames danced in the breeze, casting warm circles of light on familiar faces. Then Sarah May stepped forward. She wore a new calico dress that Widow Lona had helped her make, the fabric fitting her curves with dignity instead of shame. Her hair was neatly braided, and her eyes shone with quiet confidence. Gone was the trembling girl from the auction block. In her place stood a young woman who had found her worth. The preacher nodded, and Sarah began to sing. Her voice rose clear and strong into the pearl-gray sky, carrying words of redemption and love. The hymn poured from her heart, filling the spaces between trees and touching something deep in everyone who listened. Tears tracked down Silas's scarred cheek as he watched her. His rough whisper was meant for God alone. You knew, didn't you? You knew I needed her as much as she needed me. The words caught in his throat as he remembered his own healing. How saving Sarah had saved him too, drawing him back from bitter solitude into the warmth of family and faith. Sarah's eyes found his as she sang, and her smile broadened, radiant with joy. Around her stood her new family, not bound by blood but by something stronger. Widow Lona swayed gently to the music, her wise face peaceful. The preacher's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even some of the harder townsfolk, who had once turned away in judgment, now stood with heads bowed in respect. The first ray of sun breached the eastern horizon as Sarah's song reached its crescendo. Golden light spilled across the ridge, setting the mountains ablaze with glory. It caught in Sarah's hair, in the folds of her dress, in the tears on Silas's face. Her voice swelled with the growing light, no longer carrying any trace of fear or shame. The final note hung in the morning air, pure and triumphant. It spoke not just of survival, but of transformation of a girl who had risen from degradation to dignity, of a lonely man who had found his heart again, of a community that had learned to see with kinder eyes. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah stepped back into the circle of her chosen family. Silas laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. Widow Lona squeezed her fingers. The preacher's amen carried the weight of answered prayers. Sarah's song had ended, but its echo remained in the hearts of all who heard it. A testament to the power of love, faith, and the family that can be forged in the fires of adversity. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.